Right. Good afternoon, everyone. I think everyone's here that's meant to be here now. Thank you for attending this afternoon's webinar. Just a couple of points. If anyone has any questions, if they could send those questions through the messaging facility on the webinar, that would be great. So we hope that this webinar will give you a lot of information about chatbots and in particular about Chatbot Author, which is our product, and also the Microsoft services that is available, the benefits that can be gained from conversation as a service. First of all, I'd like just to ask Scott Goodall to say a few words about why he's from Microsoft and why we're working with Microsoft and why Microsoft are interested in our product and the synergies between us. Scott?
Hi, John. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you.
Yeah. So just to echo some of the points that John was making there, AI and machine learning is a key area for Microsoft on Azure. We're investing a heck of a lot of money into the services within there, and conversation as a service we see as one of the key Azure solutions, and that's going to be taking the public sector by storm moving forward. Already seeing multiple use cases of this already in the public sector. I deal predominantly with healthcare organisations, but I also work with regional government and housing association customers as well. And there's a key driver in efficiency saving by using conversation as a service, utilising Df2020's solution. So looking forward to sharing this with you, and they're a very key partner from a Microsoft perspective. So I'll hand back over to John to do the presenting.
Thank you, Scott. Freddie, are you ready to go?
Yes, I am. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Freddie McMahon. I co-founded Df2020 with John Rawlings. Conversation as a service is a blend of employees and chatbots delivering services to their customers, citizens, organizations. And it's an area that's grown rapidly in countries like China and Singapore in the public sector. Now the UK is starting to embrace it, and also countries in the Nordic region and America in particular. Oh, my keyboard's just seized up. Oh, there we go. So Df2020, we're an ISV, independent software vendor. Our product Chatbot Author, it's a subscription based, and it's readily available worldwide through the Microsoft Store. Microsoft has changed considerably over the last few years, and one of the new categories of partner is an IP partner. Those are partners that have actually developed new types of software that have been approved by Microsoft and deployed on the Azure. And as a result of that process, we are what's called co-sell ready, which means our product can be amplified throughout the world by Microsoft people. We're also a supplier for G-Cloud 10. And our whole focus is really empowering knowledge workers to build their own scripted chatbots, which is our specialization, which can be then deployed through the Microsoft Azure bot services, really to amplify human capabilities. And this new world and new generation of tools is really enabling knowledge workers to start small and to scale and to help amplify human capabilities. Why Microsoft? We were really impressed with Satya Nadella a few years ago when he actually announced that the whole platform was going to support chatbots itself, and he saw it as a key capability for delivering conversation as a service for empowering every person and every organization. And since then, the advances in Microsoft on their what's now called Intelligent Cloud and Intelligent Edge really just provides great capability for chatbots, and we're just a complementary part of that whole solution. So the actual problem we're addressing is worldwide. Every person organization, they have to read, understand, and action knowledge that's often embedded in huge amounts of documents like policies, regulations, standard operating procedures, etc. No one's actually measured how much of this stuff is out there, other than everyone accepts it's an awful lot. But there's millions and millions of rules, perhaps billions and billions, who knows? No one seems to have measured it at all, but it's endless pages of content that's continually changing all the time. And the whole notion of these documents and pages of content is really, it's shamelessly monologue. It can't interact with you. And as a result of that, it's so pervasive that everyone just accepts it as it is. And even though no one's really happy about it, but it's been a poor relation of technology really for many, many decades. And it's now about time that people understand that this type of documentation is not fit for purpose, and it actually has severe implications on productivity and performance. So knowledge monologue really is an impairment to decisions. And really, if you look at it in terms of the language we use, which is these documents contain choices, pathways, and outcomes. And effectively, choices, pathways, and outcomes are algorithms. And so the key question which led to our innovation was basically in these documents itself, are these algorithms weak or strong? And we've done huge amounts of work on this area, and regardless to the sector that we've investigated, both public and private sector, we have found that the algorithms are actually quite weak and often incomplete. And that's the modus operandi worldwide. And the implications are actually quite profound, because if you've got weak algorithms in these documents, then it actually compromises every single person and every single organization in their ability to make decisions. So why does this matter? Well, effectively, here's a few examples from the UK. The first, it's not a pleasant one, is 72 people died because of the Grenfell Tower. Dame Judith Hackett reviewed the fire and building regulations, and in her interim report basically said it's just not sustainable. It's just too complicated to use. You start to go through the rules, and then it makes reference to another document, then another document. It's like a spaghetti mess. Her final report ended up not making recommendations in terms of what is the transformation or digital transformation of this type of documents. And so there's this massive vacuum in the market. And though this was on fire and building regulations, it could apply anywhere. Take another example, the NHS has over £56 billion set aside on provisions for compensation. That's a staggering amount of money, but also it masks the problems underneath when it comes to not only those that have to work for the NHS, but all the citizens they actually service and the issues these sort of problems cause. Another example everyone will be familiar with is in banking that spent over £44 billion a day on PPI insurance. And, you know, if in retrospect, you took a procedure some years ago that actually was for the instructions for selling PPI and said, you know, this is the classic state of procedures in your bank. It's the same in every bank. It's going to create systemic weaknesses in the whole sector, and you're going to end up being fined over £40 billion. No one would listen to you, simply because how can you correlate just looking at that document and understanding that this has huge implications? Another example is in health and safety. The annual cost is £14.9 billion a year, every year in just the just in England itself. And these work-related injuries don't actually include the cost then of the NHS in order to support that. So these type of costs start to amplify when you look at it end to end. So really, the common language that people would recognize that there's problems in procedures is the rising cost of red tape. It's a classic way of explaining it. Compliance and non-compliance issues, but generally everyone accepts it's adversely affecting productivity. So In practice, because of the poor algorithms, it increases subjective decisions. And subjective decisions may feel right at that moment in time, but until you actually determine what the actual impact of those decisions are, then you may not be wise to the sort of mounting issues that are actually increasing. At the same time, though there's a lot of costs, times, and risks associated with it, it does actually reduce the agility and adaptability of an organization. The latest research from Harvard was only completed in August, which surveyed executives across many sectors, show that 79% of executives now believe that there's a need for the seamless and digital transformation of knowledge to improve overall business performance. The survey also then shows that there's a lack of execution associated with this, because everyone's been overwhelmed by this amount of knowledge, rule-based knowledge, but what to do about it. And so really the time is right now for the digital transformation of rule-based knowledge. And so this is where conversation as a service is the framework for thinking about this. And as we've already mentioned, this is the blended approach of employees and chatbots delivering knowledge-based services inside the organization and outside the organization. The chatbots themselves can be available 24/7. They can run parallel conversations. They can support most languages, and they can be text to voice across any digital touch point. So these are quite profound working practice changes itself. So the idea is really to have a process to create, share, measure, and evolve knowledge. By the way, that's almost a verbatim description of the IS 9001 quality standards, a new edition, which talks about now you've got to be able to manage knowledge effectively. And the whole purpose of this is to improve accurate decisions and also to improve the transparency and traceability of those decisions. Now, unlike the old days where it's big applications, this is about building small services, and you can build as many as you wish, but you can start small and scale. And so it's a transition from the monologue of documented knowledge, and of course there's knowledge in people's heads as well, that's very relevant to this, to dialogue. So monologue to dialogue. And to do this, there's just so much of it. It's really about empowering the knowledge workers to build these type of chatbots. And there you can use Chatbot Author and Microsoft's Q&A Maker, which is great for FAQs. Now we're going to look at the technology landscape associated with this. First of all, you need Windows 10 and you need an Azure account. From this, you can get Chatbot Author. Our advanced capability is a subscription model, just under £200 a month, and that empowers knowledge workers to build chatbots. There is no charge once the chatbots have been deployed, because they're deployed on the Azure of the client itself. And so you can start to then make that available to a small group of people or to millions of people. The point about the Azure is you've got instant scalability based on the new consumption model. To build the chatbots, you use knowledge maps. This is not data driven, it is knowledge driven. Why? Because in all these documents, there's no databases, there's no data processing engine, it's just knowledge documented in content form. So Chatbot Author is there using symbols and scripting behind the symbols, and it helps enforce joining up the dots, which oddly enough helps people think more clearly as well. Once the knowledge maps have been produced, you press a button and it automatically generates the software, which is called a microservice. It works on the Azure, and you can mix it with other types of microservices. So this new world isn't about applications, it's about being able to pick and mix any combination of services you wish. It's deployed into Microsoft Bot services, so it's seamlessly linked into that, and that generates an app ID and password. And with that capability, it means your chatbot built once could be then accessed from as many digital touch points as you wish. This is really great when you go to update the chatbot, because effectively then the next instance of use across any digital touch points ensures they are all using the latest knowledge with a complete audit trail associated with it. Though we're knowledge driven, we do generate dialogue data. It's a new form of big data, and you can use tools like Power BI or Microsoft's machine learning to analyze that data itself. Bear in mind, this is relative to all that knowledge documented, which has no measurements associated with it because it's just pages and pages of content. So now you're starting to see how your knowledge is actually used, and you can actually start to minutely see the user decision journeys through the choices, through the pathways leading to the appropriate outcome. And from this emergent evidence, you can then use that evidence to enrich and evolve the knowledge maps. And so you're actually expanding the boundaries of knowledge based on evidence that's emerging in real time. So the cycle times of change just get shorter and shorter. And so effectively, your chatbot becomes a working and measurable knowledge asset, and it enables that knowledge to be retained by organizations. So how is the chatbot interface with? Well, if it's not voice, then you can see the display here. You have a conversational user interface. It's like a messaging platform. In fact, the 3 billion people that use messaging platforms, that's a fertile ground for chatbots to be used, but it's not only constrained to that. You can access it from different applications, etc. And behind the conversational user interface, it has 2 purposes. One is to orchestrate the right type of dialogue at the right moment. And the second is to orchestrate services like displaying data or performing a transaction. And this requires a new way of thinking for IT and the business people on this new world of microservices to actually be able to then design behind the scenes the plug and play capabilities. So for example, Microsoft's Cognitive Services has real-time language translation and real-time text to voice, voice to text. So if you've got some knowledge that actually could be accessed by people with different languages, either nationally or even internationally or globally, then those are just plug and play capabilities. There's a lot of overhype this year in the marketplace about chatbots and natural language processing because the hype has been based on, oh, you could do anything you wish on natural language processing. Well, reality kicks in and it started to be better understood in the market that actually natural language processing is good for some things, but it cannot do everything. It's not a silver bullet that solves every type of dialogue with a chatbot itself. 3 distinctive areas that is not suitable for natural language processing. One is around morals and ethics. You know, it's difficult enough for people to determine what is morally right and ethically right. And the notion to empower machine learning to determine that is, of course, a no-no. Second area, of course, is regulation and statutes. Of course, you can't empower machine learning to actually start to rewrite regulation. Of course, that's ludicrous. And the third area is standard operating procedures, which is a fundamental control for organizations. It's instructions for people to follow. That's often linked in with regulations and statutes and moral and ethics, but also links into policies. And you can't go to the board and say, we're empowering machine learning to rewrite your policy. So in this case, then you've got things like Chatbot Author, our product, and Microsoft Q&A Maker are really good for these type of areas. So there are 3 types of dialogue rather than just one type, which is natural language processing. Microsoft has Lewis, and you need IT people to develop that natural language processing capability. The second type is single question, single answer. If you've already got FAQs, you can feed it into this product. It's Microsoft Q&A Maker, and it's aimed at knowledge workers to be able to develop FAQs through conversation itself. Great tool, and it's a very fast way of actually getting chatbots up and running. Then you've got the types of knowledge where it is choices, pathways, and outcomes, and that's where Chatbot Author is used, and again it's for knowledge workers as developers. So now you've got this world where you've got co-development, let knowledge workers and users develop chatbots using these type of tools, and then the more sophisticated, complex technology challenges are done by IT. So it's a great new model for co-development. And when you interact with a chatbot, you can use type, tap, and talk, and you can do it through any different types of devices. So now we're on to Omnichannel. So we've been used to multi-channel, like a call center and a website. Now strategy is all around Omnichannel, and the technology is there today to do this. And so you build your chatbots once, and now that can be accessible from any device or channel, from any location, inside or outside the organization. So if you were empowering knowledge workers with Chatbot Author and Q&A Maker, they would build those chatbots, deploy them on the Microsoft Bot services on your Azure portal, and then IT could actually link other services such as real-time language translation, and then deploy it through chat channels. So this is the Microsoft platform for its chatbots. It supports 13 channels, so you could deploy your chatbot so it's accessible from as many of these touch points as you want, so Skype, Team, Facebook, etc. The direct line would require IT to help work on that one because it's an API, but it means your chatbots could go anywhere, so direct line to anywhere. So it could go into your branded conversational user interface, it could link into Dynamics 365 and Office 365, could link into any application, mobile or enterprise app, or into any call center or voice-enabled IoT. So the world of Omnichannel exists today. Many of the channels are out of the box, and anything that's not, there's an API to actually do that. And so this whole notion that you can make your knowledge available, build it once, and access it from as many points as you wish is now a reality. The technology is advancing so quickly, it's now a need for the business framework and business strategies to really realign and catch up with that technology. So I'm just going to go through a little use case, and then I'll go into a demonstration. And this one we co-developed with Microsoft. They have been developing a concept called Citizen Bots. And within that Citizen Bot, you can orchestrate Lewis, you can orchestrate Q&A Maker, and you can orchestrate scripted dialogue produced by Chatbot Author. We were involved when the knowledge got quite complex, meaning lots of choices, pathways, and outcomes. And so this use case involved the planning regulations, where citizens that want to extend their property needed to determine whether they needed planning permission, or they were never going to get planning permission, or whether indeed under current regulation, this is English regulation, they are already entitled to do the type of extension under these very specific conditions. So very strong national regulation. It's contained in 2 documents of 155 pages. So you've got the actual regulation and the technical guidelines to explain those regulations itself. And actually, when you then start to look at this content, though it's very strong, there's weak national data because it's so difficult to get that data. Now, 365 or so local governments, they take that regulation and they reinvent the wheel. So they put content onto their websites, they do process diagrams, they do policies and procedures, they do training, and so forth itself. It doesn't mean when they reinvent the wheel, do they capture it precisely in the way the national regulation is done. In fact, you can go to websites from the local government, and you can actually then compare the national regulation to the content on that, and you'll find there's a disconnect. And so this reproduction of content in many places, even though there's a golden source, the national regulation, is pervasive. And generally, you'll find that the content, because it's so difficult to write algorithms in content, typically has missing rules and missing information. And because there's no transparency on the way that content is used, then problems that do occur tend to emerge sometime later. So we created one chatbot just to cover one subset of these rules to do with the Loft extension. And what we found is in the choices defined by the regulation itself, there were some types of choices where there was potentially risk of people taking the wrong option. And it's easier to show you than talk about that, but we call those nano risks in their own right. In the chatbot prototype we did, it had 19 distinctive outcomes. And the journey time is 1 to 2 minutes associated with that. So you're collapsing down the time, but you're increasing the accuracy of the decisions itself. Also, once you move to conversation as service, you can start to stimulate ideas for new revenue generations for the public sector. So, for example, once you determine that you do need planning permission, you then got to go off and fill in forms, etc., etc. Well, what if the chatbot offered you to say, look, let me produce the forms for you and do your submission. I just need to ask you some additional questions, get some additional data from you, and I'll do the submission, but I'll charge you for that. And there's a price point of convenience. Maybe it's £10, £20, £30, but it's a revenue stream. And at the moment, there is no revenue stream associated with that. Then there's a situation where under very precise sets of conditions, a householder may well be permitted to actually do an extension to their property without planning permission itself. Now, their use of the regulations through the conversation as a service, because there's a complete audit trail, the chatbot could actually offer that to store that compliance record and perhaps then charge say £10 or £15 a year for the storage, and it's then linked to the property, and then that's a subscription that could be there for as long as the extension's there. Also, you can actually generate real-time national benchmarks and trend analysis. So where there are weaknesses in the regulation, the improvement loops can be a lot shorter. And there's a new trend basically called knowledge process outsourcing. It's been driven more from the east, but coming towards the west now. It's like business process outsourcing, but it's more to do with more complex knowledge. It's already generating $28 billion a year, and it's expected within a matter of a few years to be in excess of $100 billion, and that's without even consideration to chatbots. But there's no reason why the public sector can't generate revenues and let someone start to do this and offer its services to the other public authorities. So I'm going to go into a demonstration. I'm going to show you what knowledge maps look like. I'm going to simulate a conversation with a chatbot. We're going to then publish it. We're going to show you what it looks like through Omnichannel deployment, and then show you some of the analytics of a leaderboard of inefficient conversations, and some visual analytics of the user decision journeys. And these last two are new types of insights because there's never been the data before. So we now go to chatbot author. This is the one on the Loft extension mentioned earlier. You can see it looks like a flow chart. It looks like a decision tree. If I click on the landscape, you see the menu. There's different types of choices. You've got help, video help. A pathway needs to end with an outcome or can link to another knowledge map. So one knowledge map equals one chatbot. If you link to another knowledge map, that's a different chatbot that has a seamless handover or could be accessed directly. And often you find these chatbots become like subject matter experts. You've got branching and you've got a note. So if I just put my name on there, and you can see behind each symbol, there's a properties page. You simply fill in, and there's the script. You can see it's maximum 300 characters. That's for two reasons. One, the knowledge worker is forced to break down the knowledge into bite-sized chunks. And the second reason is we've set a universal benchmark that someone should be able to read, understand, and move to the next step in 8 seconds. And 300 characters is a limit to there. You can add images or videos. to help the dialogue itself. Once you're okay with that, you can see then that's that symbol there. Now this is a completed map, meaning all the dots are connected. It's complete circuit, so there's nowhere for me to join this up. And so that's part of the reason why it's a validation, why it's validation as a knowledge map itself. If I go into the test facility, it says Freddie's not connected. So just before I delete myself here, you've got editing, copying, and cloning capabilities, but I'm just going to delete. And now I'll go into the test facility, and now I'm simulating on the right-hand side the conversational user interface. When this goes into production, you won't be able to see the knowledge map, but the knowledge map is there just to help the knowledge worker determine the testing. And this is a big shift from usability testing to understandability testing. Now, this is my favorite step in a dialogue. It comes from the regulation, and it says, is the extension to be higher than the highest part of the roof? Well, it presumes that everyone knows what the highest part of the roof is. And of course, in regulations, there are no pictures. So we've added a picture here, which points to the highest part of the roof, and which is the apex. And this is an example of a nano risk. So nano risk is down at the level of choices where options are presented. And if there's a risk of people taking the wrong option, then the outcome is going to be wrong. And there's then unintended consequences. So there are lots of different techniques. We have a good training guide to help people understand techniques of reducing these sort of risks. Once you've completed, you're ready to publish. You just press that button, which I won't do now, but I'll just show you behind the scenes. When you publish, it automatically generates a microservice. That's the address. You click onto the Microsoft Bot Framework or Bot Service. There's a form to fill in. Microsoft gives you an app ID and password. You enter those back in and update, and now you're live. And the way that looks like in Microsoft's environment is you have these different channels. Those are the ones I mentioned in the PowerPoint presentation itself, and you can test it, etc., etc. And so if you just took web chat, which means the chatbot could be accessible from any browser application, Microsoft generates a basic front end, and so there's that chatbot itself or scripted dialogue itself. But if you want to have your own type of front end, there's one from the Pensions Advisory Service trying to explain defined benefits to defined contributions, and you can design it in your own right. So of course it bits voice, you wouldn't see any front end whatsoever. If I go back to Chatbot Author, I just want to show you some of the analytics. So this is anonymized data, and we have a leaderboard to give feedback to the author, because it's very difficult to get feedback when it's content-based. And the leaderboard actually works out for you what the average time per step is. So you can see this is the language used by the author. That's the step type, and that's the average time for it. So if it's quite a long time, you could actually then go in, change the dialogue, republish, and then effectively you're improving the knowledge itself. Now, in order to do visualization, we use the map produced by the knowledge worker, and we display data, which is through volumes or timings. And you can see 62 journeys through this, and you see which outcomes have been reached, which outcomes haven't been reached. You can also see where people have changed their minds. So you've now got the type of metrics that you've never seen before. So that's a quick demonstration of the technology. So to just quickly reflect back, I've shown you knowledge maps, dialogue simulation, publish the chatbot, omnichannel deployment, leaderboard analytics, and visualization analytics. I know there's a lot to take in. We'll send you this material for you. Now, this is just another use case just to help you understand this. It's not a pleasant subject, but we go wherever people have issues around knowledge. And so this is to do with safeguarding children. In particular, it's to do with the start of the process which is the identification of possible child abuse. A lot of false positives, a lot of false negatives, just judging by the national benchmarks on this. Every expert I've talked to have said that we've got some of the best national regulation in the world, but weak national deployment. Why? There's over 200,000 organizations. Each one's expected to interpret that regulation and deploy their own policies and procedures around it. The Department of Education produces statistics, but of course, that's quite late in the day, maybe 18 months later. And so they're lag indicators. If you've got lag indicators, that means it's already weak. And also the type of data they report on don't seem to match the regulation. So someone needs to join up the dots there. So this academy approached us and they said, look, we just paid lawyers £25,000 for procedures. They produced 17 pages. We did some tests. It takes 32 minutes on average to read it once. They need to spend money on training. They've got no transparency or traceability of the user decision journeys. Why? Because it's content, pages to pages. They're quite concerned if something happens on their watch, then that's a brand risk, but it's also a risk for the executives at the board level. And so from the 17 pages, we produced 10 chatbots. One was really a router to put people in the right direction, but 9 were specialists. So just like in the world of people where you end up with subject matter experts, it's the same with these type of chatbots. So there were chatbots on identifying sexual abuse, identifying physical abuse. 2 of the specialist areas were quite weak in this document. One was female genital mutilation, and it basically said go to the government website, which we did. Knowledge wasn't very good there, but at least it was better than in the document. And the second one, and this is a common mistake made, is it said if a child is missing, go to the missing procedure. Now, the problem is that you go to the missing procedure, which covers what you're supposed to do when a child is missing, but you've now lost any context to safeguarding children. And this was the type of issues identified by Dame Judith Hackett on fire and safety. It's the same issue everywhere. Everyone references everything else, and they expect everyone to understand it. The journey time through this is 1 to 3 minutes. And we were then approached by a Premier Division football club. They handed over their procedures, and we found that the knowledge in the chatbots from that original document was already better than the football club. However, there was one category of knowledge that was missing from those 17 pages, and that was some excellent guidelines of how you should communicate with a child when there's possible child abuse. We were then approached by a primary school that had some additional knowledge, and that impacted the granularity of outcomes. So now, through this experiment, the knowledge in the chatbots is already better than the 3 organizations because it's aggregated knowledge. 64 distinctive outcomes. Because this whole world of rule-based knowledge hasn't ever been measured before, 64 distinctive outcomes just in this piece, which is the first piece of the process itself, you then start to think, gee, how many distinctive outcomes are there in all the regulations and statutes just in our country alone? So really this gives calls to say, should we start to rethink how we deal with this capability? And it really is time for strong transparency and traceability. I know everyone talks about it in safeguarding, but really you've got to crack the knowledge. And maybe that's a time for knowledge process outsourcing. The type of data generated is called dialogue data. I'm just wrapping up now and can take some questions. So if you've got any questions, do start to think about those and send them through. But the dialogue data, it's a new form of big data. It goes down to the granularity of every dialogue step. Each step is date and time stamped, and it's the verbatim and of what the actual interaction was. Interesting enough, if I worked still in the banking industry and I was someone approached me and said, Freddie, you didn't follow procedures 3 years ago, I'm already in trouble, because how could I prove I did use those procedures and use them correctly? Whereas now I wouldn't even have to be asked, because there's a complete audit trail. And even if the procedures change 5 minutes later, I'm safe. So it's a great way of safeguarding employees as well as customers. The dialogue data can be used for multiple things. You could put it into a case for the employee, the customer, the supplier, the citizen, the business. So you could use something like Dynamics 365 for that. You could put the anonymized data into a data lake. Again, that's available on Azure. The value of that data really is in context to the subject of the knowledge itself, because not all knowledge is equal value, and not all data generated from that knowledge is of equal value. But according to the subject, it could be invaluable. And you could link the dialogue data into contracts and into things like ledgers. So contracts would be to avoid mis-selling or misrepresenting people itself. So start small and scale. You can start today with Chatbot Author, Script Dialogue. You can then store the data into cases. So typically that would be kept for 7 years for regulatory compliance. You could store anonymized data into data lakes and apply machine learning and other techniques like Power BI to that. You can then link into the conversation as a user interface, Q&A dialogue. So you need conversational designers to work out what is the right blend of those. You could add natural language processing, which is great for searching capabilities. You could then add cognitive services for, say, real-time language translation. But then you can get into things such as more sophisticated stuff, where you could actually be gathering new types of data instead of form filling. You could be displaying types of data. You could be doing transactions and so forth. So this new world, again, I stress, it should be a blended approach of knowledge workers producing some of the chatbots, and then IT producing the more sophisticated stuff. And all of this is orchestrated under the conversational user interface. So ours is just specializes in our area, but it can be pick and mixed with all this other capability. Microsoft has Teams, which is a great area for people to collaborate and communicate together. They could be equipped with Chatbot Author and Q&A Maker to become knowledge factories. So you've got communities of practice or communities of practitioners, and they could be delivering knowledge services internally, externally, everywhere. That'd be great for Brexit. So these just wrapping up now. The benefits is dialogue-driven self-service at scale. That's inside, outside the organization. You can have instant upskilling. So if you think about a binary choice of yes, no, but what about the third one? I'm not too sure. You could go down another pathway, explain things to help people then make an informed decision. Instant upskilling itself really is quite profound, because it could be a fundamental shift enabler away from siloism in organizations. You can automate and streamline the use of knowledge, smarter decision and outcomes, and measurable, and you can reduce the nano risks at choices where people could be taking the wrong option itself. Everything's transparent and traceable, which is great for compliance and safeguarding employees, the brand, the people using it. Incredibly efficient and effective. Just the time it takes to read pages, you could have already completed your interaction with the chatbot with a complete audit trail. And more importantly, not only using the data generated to enrich knowledge, but also expanding the boundaries of knowledge. We are now looking at a simple way of linking knowledge with new forms of business intelligence. And at the end of the day, it's about retaining knowledge as a working and measurable asset. So the organization, the public sector, retains the knowledge when people leave. So where to start? Well, rule-based knowledge, but anywhere where there's issues that people are facing. So if you hear words like negligence, errors, false positives, false negatives, handoffs, those are potentially early places to start on. And in summary, just wrapping up now, this is the last slide. Again, we'll send you all this material. It's readily available. It's designed to for this new world of just do it, just download and do it. Start building chatbots itself, and you can do that just through the Microsoft Store. So that's our go-to-market through the Microsoft Store. We also look for early adopters that can be partners or customers. But sometimes we're finding customers suddenly start to think, oh my goodness, we could become a partner of Microsoft and generate new types of revenues, and that's including the public sector. But the crucial thing is you've got repeatable IP in the form of knowledge, then that potentially ticks the box for knowledge process outsourcing. And so this is all about the seamless and digital access to knowledge. It's a big paradigm shift. Digital transformation doesn't feel enough on it. It's a big paradigm shift because it changes everything. There's 230 million knowledge workers out there. That's our target audience to empower them. We want to empower them with Chatbot Author. Microsoft wants to empower them with Q&A Maker, and the two complement each other to deliver digital knowledge. John, I'll just hand over to you now.
Thank you, Freddie. And one of the questions that we've got, Freddie, is just around how long it has taken us with the examples that you've given around the loft conversion and the child protection. How long did it take us to actually build the chatbots from the documentation that we'd been sent?
Well, yeah, thank you for the question. So the one on the loft extension took 6 hours start to finish, and it was the same day. It was simply we got a call to say, could you do this quite quickly, because it's just too difficult to write the software code to do it. But it could have been a bit shorter. We looked at the various content, and we found it inconsistent with the regulation. So it was actually easier just to go to the regulation and use that as a source. So we lost a couple of hours working that one out. But once we decided the golden source was the regulation, it then took 4 hours to do it. And that is also doing some research to look at pictures to embed with the dialogue, because we thought some of the dialogue was too risky without complementing it with pictures in the way it described itself. The one to do with the child protection, again identifying potential child abuse, that took about 2 to 3 days. I can't remember precisely now, but it's that order of magnitude. And the reason for that is it was not very clear at first that the knowledge actually broke down into clear subject areas. So once we realized that, then we identified the subject areas, and then that was relatively straightforward. But we lost time because of the reference. I'll go off to the missing procedures. We had to go and find that and research that and realize that there was no context. And we had to go to female genital mutilation on the government website, which wasn't very good, but better than lawyers. And we tried to do some research, but we just didn't know enough about the subject to be able to improve the knowledge itself. I know this sounds a bit strange, but I'll mention that to you. If one had a conversational designer and said, look, there's 9 specialist subject areas in identifying child abuse, which is the 9 categories we've got, and you had a knowledge worker specialist in each of the subjects. So you had one that specialized in female genital mutilation, and the one that specialized in missing, another one on sexual abuse, and so forth. There's no reason why those 9 couldn't be developed in parallel. So this is an interesting one, because then for each one, let's just say it takes 2 hours to build and test and deploy, 2 or 3 hours max, I'd say. You've got this whole new notion of parallel development as long as you've got someone that's actually deconstructing, reconstructing the knowledge into different domains of knowledge and then farm it out to different experts. So we do see that you could do parallel development, because why should you have a generalist doing it when you could have an expert on female genital mutilation doing a far better job building up that knowledge associated with it? Does that help answer, John?
Yeah, that's great, Freddie. They were the only questions that that have come through. So very quickly, if anyone else has a question, then let us have that in the next few seconds or so. Otherwise, we will wrap up. Thank you all for attending this afternoon's webinar. We will be sending out a recording of this afternoon's session, so that can refresh your memories, or you'll be able to share that with colleagues if you wish to. If you have any questions on reflection, then do let us know, and we'll do our best to answer those. And yeah, the one final thing is that we will, anybody that, or the first 3 people from this afternoon's call, if you wish to trial the product, then on offer is a promo code for a month's free trial. So just drop me an email and let me know that you would be interested in that. Okay, so now the questions have come through, Freddie. So I think that's the end of the session. Thank you again, and hope to talk to you at some future point. Thanks very much. Bye-bye now.
Bye, everybody.